Welcome to the CFB Dynasty Podcast with hosts Matt Knowles, Brian McElfresh, and Doug Gravely.
Hey everybody, how you doing out there in CFBDynasty.com land? It's time once again for the CFB Dynasty Podcast. My name is Matt Knowles alongside Brian McElfresh. Doug Gravely is on a sabbatical today, doing something. We have no idea what it is. But BMAC, what do you think Doug is doing instead of being here on the podcast with us?
Couch. That's my guess right now.
Fair enough. So Doug is on the couch. So too bad for Doug because we've got a great show today. We got three main topics we're going to talk about. Obviously, there's a couple of huge things that have happened in the real world when it comes to college football. You've got the NIL lawsuit that is going to change the entire face of the real world. You've got all kinds of stuff dropping for the video game that's going to change the fantasy world in that respect. And then we're going to talk real fantasy. We're going to talk about some ADP risers and fallers that have happened post-spring. So we've got a great show for you, tons of information today. It's going to be awesome. So BMAC, let's get right down to it first. So last week, there was a landmark decision that happened where you had the Grant House versus NCAA antitrust lawsuit, where the NCAA has now agreed to pay $2.7 billion. Again, $2.7 billion. That number could go up to $4 billion if they have any kind of appeals. This lawsuit is about players that felt like they were inhibited from being able to do NIL deals all the way back to 2016. So this is money that's going to get paid for players that we were drafting 8 years ago that are like, this could even be like a Patrick Mahomes that could be getting some NIL money that they weren't able to get when they were in college.
He needs it.
But then also, yeah, really, he surely does. If anybody needs it, it's him. But then also the power conferences have all agreed. They've all signed on to say that up to $20 million of their athletic budget must go to sports programs. So not just football. It could be your water polo team. It could be your soccer team. It could be your golf team. It could be men's or women's due to Title IX. But $20 million. So all this means is that the notion that we've had for decades that the NCAA has tried to push that college sports are amateur and they don't need to be paid is done. As of last week, that is no more. BMAC, what do you think about the fact that college sports being amateur as we know it is going to change, and you are going to be able to have athletes being paid above board for being on the team outside of NILs? The schools are literally going to be signing a check for a player. Are you excited about this? Are you afraid about this for college football? What are your initial thoughts?
So I don't think the current status of the game of college football will last a long time as it is now with the portal craziness, etc. I know like the SEC, they were just meeting in Florida and talking about all that stuff. And while there's nothing definitive yet from the Ross Dellinger report that I read this morning, I do think there are steps in play that will make things more stable in terms of the portal, players getting paid by the school and or potentially the conference, which could be tied to things like, all right, you can't transfer to another school in the conference, or if you transfer, that money is gone kind of thing. Like, I don't know what's going to come, but it seems like that is the next phase of this where things will be put in place. And it'll be more, like you would expect, not an open-ended portal where there's no consequences for your actions, but more like the real world of work where there are consequences, if you break what would be a contract at that point because you're getting paid.
Well, one of the things that I am hopeful for is you look at the Rashada lawsuit against Florida right now. He felt like Florida didn't make good on a $13 million NIL deal. My takeaway from that is, why in the heck is an incoming freshman, why do they even have the ability to go try and negotiate a $13 million contract? That's akin to back in the day when the number one pick in the NFL draft, just because they were the number one pick, could potentially make more money over his career or just on that first contract than guys that were all pros that were undrafted or went in the 6th or 7th round. And they had to really fix that to make these guys have to earn their money. If a guy like Rashada can go and file a lawsuit over an unpaid $13 million NIL deal, that's nuts. That's a system that needs to get under control. And I agree with you. I like the fact that there could be some controls in place. I like the fact that all the power conferences have signed on to this $20 million out of the athletic budgets have to go to paying players. And obviously they're saying this could be a split between the power conferences and the group of 5. And that's a whole other show, a whole other discussion topic that we could have. But getting controls so that way you can root for your favorite players at that team and know they're actually going to be there. And when it comes to this podcast and fantasy football, knowing that if you go and draft a guy, that he's actually going to stay in that offense. You might draft a guy because he's in the Hawaii offense and you know they're going to have a high-powered offense that's going to be throwing the ball a lot. You don't want that Hawaii wide receiver transferring to Wisconsin because then he might not ever get the ball thrown to him, or a wide receiver going to Iowa or to a military school that's going to be running a wing offense or something like that. So I am hopeful to see where this goes. And I've always been big on how ridiculous it is that college athletes are claimed to be amateurs.
Yeah. I mean, when those college players do step up from, a small school to a big, whatever, SEC, Big 10, Big 12 school, and they make it, then their NFL stock obviously goes up with the better competition. There's tons of examples of it not working out. So you think of Zachary Franklin from UTSA to Ole Miss, and Isaiah Nair from Wyoming to Texas, and I'm sure there's hundreds of those examples.
All the Kent State wide receivers that transferred last year.
Yeah, right. But Kent State was a mess. But yeah, I'm for it, assuming that it goes to a more regulated and stable place where you know who you're going to have on your roster. I remember hearing Kirby Smart talk about that. He was like, in the spring, we're doing practicing and we're going through spring ball, like figuring out who, like, reps and who's going to get what reps. Like, at that point, you really should know who's going to be on your roster in the fall, but you don't. Yeah. And that's just leads to, there's so many issues, but one of them being coach burnout, where they're recruiting all year round, but now they've got to also recruit their team knowing that they're being tampered with. So
yeah,
when all that stuff's regulated, college football will be in a better, more stable place. And regarding the those power conferences versus the lower ones, I mean, I would love to see lower schools getting paid to have their spring game against an SEC school or whatever, and then maybe less, competition against those types of schools in the spring, and let them have their own playoff. Like a UTSA, when they're hot, they deserve to play in a playoff, and just because they lost one game and had a terrible strength of schedule, they get a medium level bowl game.
Yep. Almost like an NCAA March Madness versus an NIT tournament kind of thing, where you could have a team that still is able to get into the college football playoff, but have a playoff that's set up for the group of 5. I mean, you've already got it with FCS Division II, Division III. Why not make that other separate group in there for? Yeah, I think that's where college football is going to be interesting to see. But
what would we do in fantasy though? At that point, I know Fantrax is so great with customizations and whatnot, and we obviously in our fantasy pool we don't have Division II, Division III currently. Would we keep, say, all the Toledo schools, etc.?
In my mind, I would say as long as there's still movement between games between the two different sides, as long as your schedule still looked like it does right now.
Yeah.
I would say I would personally be in favor of keeping it, just because you get so much more of a different take on what games are. Your money games at the beginning of the season, you've got schools like Western Kentucky that could get smacked versus a Power 5 school. But then as the season goes on, that might be the team you need to be able to win your championship at the end of the season. But
Heck
those
yeah.
are,
I think a lot of people will come to the college fantasy game if that, like new people will, if that happens, if there is separation there between those power schools, because that's a fear I think of a lot of them. It's like, oh, I got to know somebody at Wyoming, or how do I know 130 different schools? When in reality, like, you can customize that now. Like, you can pick just SEC, Big 10, Big 12, ACC if you want to, add Notre Dame if you want to. Like, it's customizable down to the team on Fantrax. So that's one of the things we've loved about them for so long.
Well, I feel like this is going to be a conversation we'll probably touch on the developments of this possibly every podcast or every other podcast kind of thing, just because this is something that's going to be a lot of moving parts that could affect the game that we know it on TV and the game that we play it online. So I think we're probably going to talk about this a lot. But speaking about playing online, we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about the college football 25 game. Since we last talked, there's been an absolute ton of stuff that's dropped, even stuff that just dropped this morning. BMAC, why don't you take it away? Why don't you talk about all the things that have gotten on your radar for the college football video game?
Yeah, so I am so excited now. And one of the number one reason, I'll get right to it, Stadium Pulse coming back. I love how this your screen's shaking if you're in whatever LSU at night and you're playing against them on the road and it's third down. It's like super loud. And then they took it to the next level where they had this before too. If you had a freshman, maybe he runs the wrong route because he's rattled, or a quarterback that's rattled, and it takes forever to audible, and then you've got to burn a timeout. Stuff that happens in real life. So I love Stadium Pulse. And I love right there, if you're watching on YouTube, seeing the Gators make an interception. It's pretty crazy seeing the Gators defense do something well. However, a little later on, of course, this has been a theme of the show. Of course, ETN scores a touchdown right here on the Gators. Just jukes our free safety and then goes into the house. But I love that. And then the wear and tear option is cool.
One of the things I like, I've heard that the kicking game is going to be a lot different because it's college, and they want the kicking game to be a lot more volatile than you've seen it in the past. I think that's great because the kicking game is volatile in college. And if it's just you go up to the line of scrimmage and you know that extra points and field goals are going to be basically a done deal, that takes the kicking game out. Kicking game is such a big part of working in college football. So I'm glad that even down to little things like that, they're trying to make it better. That was cool with the patterns right there where you could tell the receivers were going to be all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're worried going into this, or right before you snap it, are they going to run the right route? Can they hear the audible, all that stuff? That's great. And then if you're familiar with Madden, and NBA 2K kind of has this too, where you have like individual attributes that superstars can get. So you might have whatever, let's say Shador Sanders, who's unflappable in a big stadium, or someone with like a beast of a stiff arm, like that kind of stuff. You can get player like attributes where they can be better than average at a thing or another thing. And I think each player can have up to 6 or 8. I can't quite remember.
Yeah, I don't remember what the total was on there too. There's been so much information that's come out. There's a lot of great articles out there right now. I know there's been some playthrough articles where people have talked about like the top 25 things that they saw when they were in there, and I'm excited about a lot of the information that's come out right now, because one of the problems I think with the NCAA 14 game was, and the entire run was that once you figured the game out, whether it was playing against the computer or playing against your buddy, there were some things that I don't want to say were unbeatable, but there were some things that became so unrealistic. I'll tell you right now, BMAC is one of the best guys I've ever seen on the controller. And BMAC could do some stuff that just didn't make any sense on the controller if you're playing him. And it sounds like they've tried to make you have to be elite on the controller to make the game be your game in a sense. And I think that that's good. You shouldn't be able to get on the controller and be someone who's of lesser skill like myself and be able to compete with somebody like BMAC if you're playing head to head in that respect.
Or conversely, if you're playing against the computer at the hardest level and you've got a UTEP playing on the road against Alabama, that like 999.9 times out of 1,000, you're going to lose that game and lose it handily. And so hopefully they've fixed that. Also the recruiting, like I remember sometimes, there would just be a 5-star player that just wasn't recruited, and you could just recruit him as whatever App State or whatever smaller school you wanted to play with. So that always kind of made the game kind of suck when it made it easy for you to do well as a small school. But I mean, of course, that's going to be a big part of Dynasty Mode. Everyone loves that, and we'll be running ours in the next month and a half if you get your PS5.
I'm saying that I want to. The cost is just so prohibitive. But you know what? That's what you got to do if you want to be in the game. You gotta have the system. But yeah, I think again, just like we talked about with the first topic today, I think this is going to be a topic for a while. That's going to be something that we go back to pretty much every other show when there's new information. I think there's going to be so many new things. I know we're probably going to have shows where BMAC is probably going to talk about, here's my experiences in the gameplay with the game. Here's what I feel has improved or is lesser than. Oh, I do know one thing that I did see about the game that I thought was interesting was, okay, so back in the day, one of the things that myself, my late brother, a few other people were really well known to do was to change the attributes of every single player on the team. You change your name, you change the way they look. There'd be so many attributes you could change. You would fully customize your team, even your recruiting class coming in. From what I read, if it is a NIL player that has had their likeness come into the game, that you're going to have very limited things you can do to change that person because of their NIL. So if you've got Shador Sanders or you've got Carson Beck or whoever it may be, you might not be able to go and do any kind of changes to them because of the NIL agreement. So that might be part of that, which if you're playing Dynasty Mode, you get 5 years down the line, all those guys are going to be graduated out of the school anyways. But those are interesting things like that because of the new era of college football that we're going to have to contend with. But you know what? I'd rather have to deal with that than not having a game at all.
No doubt. Oh, I'm excited. And we're going to have to make a way for you to get this game. We'll figure that out of band. Yeah.
Yeah, you ready to get so for what you guys are here to talk about, you guys want to know about your fantasy draft, about your fantasy teams, how you can improve your fantasy team going into the 2024 season. The topic from a fantasy football perspective today is the post-spring ADP risers, average draft position based on the what's happened in the spring games. And now that the portal is closed, we don't have to worry about any more portal transfers, portal changes happening right now. So BMAC and Doug have put together a few guys at quarterback, running back, wide receiver that they wanted to make sure you guys knew about and had an understanding as to why these guys are going up the board. So BMAC, first guy you have on the list, University of Miami quarterback Cam Ward, moving up the list. Tell us why you believe Cam Ward has jumped.
And I'll show you too on the screen if you're there. All of these are available. If you go to Draft Prep, Draft Central, Doug and I will be making a bunch of updates here, hopefully over the weekend or at least early into next week. But one thing that I just wanted to get your feedback on real quick, Matt, and then anyone else who wants to chime in. I was going back and forth with a member, just sharing my screen, going over some things. He had some questions after just signing up on the site. So we have our standard rankings page. Like you can click standard quarterbacks, you can click dynasty quarterbacks, you can click Devy quarterbacks. But just to make the page easier, make less pages there. I have this version where it has the tabs, so it is not obvious. I think so. I'm gonna probably make some tweaks there, but we have the tabs here where you can just have, here's your tight ends page. You can click on CFF, you can click on Dynasty rankings, which are coming soon, and then you can click on Devy, which are obviously completely different from CFF. Yeah, any thoughts there, Matt? Good or bad?
I actually like it like this way better, where it's like you go to one tab off the drop down, and from that drop down, then you go in here and you can customize it from that point. I think that that's way better. That way you can have less clutter, so to speak, on your main drop downs. And then if there's other items, like I saw that you've got a nice tab up there now for the podcast, you have more room to put those things in there and they don't get lost in the shuffle from somebody just going to the page and one click away to get to the information they need. So I like this version a lot.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for the feedback. I'll make some tweaks there. Plenty of site changes need to happen, but rankings, updates, etc. keep happening as news comes. Still have a ways to go in terms of tight end and wide receivers on the depth charts, catching up with some of the things that have happened recently. But yeah, ADP risers. I don't have fallers. I know we talked about that earlier, but Cam Ward. So just continue to hear great things out of Miami from the coaching staff and whatnot. But that's normal. You should hear great things in spring. That's just part of it. NFL, it's happening there where you're just always going to hear good things about everybody unless they get hurt. So this also is coming from Josh Pate, who was down there in Miami and watched things firsthand. So Cam Ward had the opportunity to probably be a mid-round NFL draft pick, and now he's playing behind what should be a much improved offensive line with Damian Martinez at running back, taking pressure off there.
Incredible.
And then some legit weapons at wide receiver, and they're getting their tight end back and healthy. And they've got a couple of tight ends there. So Miami's offense with Cam Ward, he's in a really good spot. And one of the things we haven't added yet, but I will add, let's put some pressure on myself in the next 7 days or so. We do have, everything is based off of statistical projections, and those get tweaked, as news comes in or whatever, or we get more data or injuries happen or depth chart changes happen. We're in there tweaking the projection, by percentages or whatever. So Cam Ward, right now we have him at QB 25. So in a standard 12-team league, he'd be a QB2 for someone. And we've got him at 3,261 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, and then adding 3 more on the ground. Cam Ward probably isn't going to do a ton better than that in terms of ceiling, but I think he can be a really solid QB2, and their schedule's not too bad. They do open up in the Swamp, which would be wild. I still got to decide. I always go to the first home game, but got to decide if I want to go to that one or not, because it's such a good day of college football at every time slot that day.
So you got 2 more quarterbacks on here we want to talk about. So you got Jalen Raynor from Arkansas State. Why is he somebody that is in the top 3 quarterbacks that you wanted to make sure people knew about the ADP risers?
Yeah, he was just one that as we did some more, that was more of a not news or news related, really just doing a little more research, and we bumped up his rushing numbers, specifically have him at 8.5 projected rushing touchdowns, which put him up to 14th in our quarterback rankings. He had a solid move from the 20s area up to 14, and should have a solid season there at Arkansas State.
All right, then last but not least, Jordan McLeod. So Jordan McLeod, he is somebody that's always getting talked about because of where he's been and where he's at now. So Texas State, you've got him moved up the projections. Why did you move Jordan McLeod up?
Yeah, so he comes James Madison, and he's playing for a coach that was one of my early fantasy quarterbacks when we started, about 16 years ago. GJ Kinney, when he was the quarterback at Tulsa back in the day for me. That was
Yep, I remember.
super fun because that offense was great. Sorry, I'm still battling a cough. But McLeod's going to get his, man. He's so good on the ground, but also great through the air. I just love what he's going to do in that offense. He might hurt Mahdi a bit because I think McLeod's going to take some of his red zone touchdowns. But overall, it's a really great fit. So with his projections, let's see, since he went to Texas State, we've got him at 3,700 yards, 30 touchdowns through the air, and 5 more on the ground. Would put him at QB 13
That's
right
incredible.
now. And it's so tight there. Like literally 2 touchdowns would put him up in the top 8. So it's really tight around where he's at. So he definitely could be a QB1 for somebody this year.
I do think that your point about Ishmael Mahdi, that's a huge point to bring up because he's somebody that was just really moving up the line there. Now you put a great player like that in the same offense. Does Ishmael Mahdi get hurt by McLeod? Does McLeod's numbers get hurt by Mahdi? Because maybe Mahdi takes away some of McLeod's rushing opportunities, but that's going to be a fun one to pay attention to because that's a fun offense in college fantasy right now.
Yeah, no doubt.
All right, so let's move over to running back. So the number one running back, you got Quali Conley from Arizona. He is somebody you got moving up the line. Actually, he's the second one you got on there. We'll still go to him first, though.
Yeah, sure. Conley. So they had 2 players transfer into Arizona. Conley, 1, very productive. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt also came into Arizona, also super productive. So it was looking like it was going to be a classic running back by committee scenario. And that's no good for fantasy when you take 2 players who are super productive and then have them split. But Krosky-Merritt flipped his commitment to Ole Miss. So our projections changed quite a bit for Conley after that. So now we have him as the clear bell cow at Arizona at 1,145 yards and 11.78 touchdowns projected. And that puts him, let's see where that puts Conley in the rankings. He's at RB 27.
In running backs, that's somebody who could potentially be a starter if you've got a league that can have 3 running backs. So
yeah, right.
All right, so I accidentally skipped over Marquez Cooper. Marquez Cooper now San Diego State. Let's talk about why you got Marquez Cooper up there.
Was at Kent State, then Ball State, now San Diego State. He's playing for his old coach, and that's where everything got started for him at Kent State. So, and that's really also why he is the all-purpose yards leader in the whole country right now for active players. So Marquez Cooper is going to get right back at it. Should be a better O-line that he has to work with. And also not a freaking brutal schedule out of the gate. You saw them play when he was at Kent State and then also I think Ball State, where they played, like you can see the highlights on the screen, playing against Georgia. They played a brutal schedule that made him unstartable in 3 out of the 4 early games, I think last year. But should be a great opportunity for him to pick up where he left off, really at Kent State, and just have a big season in terms of yards. Let's see where we've got him in the projections right now. So he was obviously before he was completely off the board when he wasn't on a team for quite a while. And now we've got him at RB 24, projected to have 1,278 yards on the ground and another 12 touchdowns We've got him projected only for 95 receiving yards on 9 catches for no touchdowns. That's just kind of based on some history there. So if he catches a couple touchdowns, like, man, that changes him quite a bit. That puts him up near the 15 to 16-ish mark, and could go higher. He's a explosive player, and a proven commodity there. Should be the bell cow for San Diego State.
So it looks like running back wise, we're basically staying on the West Coast for the entire segment. So now we're just going to go to San Jose State, Floyd Chalk. Let's talk about why you got Floyd Chalk jumping up in the ADPs.
Yeah, exactly. So Chalk was one that was really unknown. We gave credit to Volume Pigs for calling him out a few shows back. And so I wanted to make sure that was known, that he gets some credit for this rankings boost, because Kyrie Robinson, as you guys know, was really, really great last year. So he went for 1,194 yards, which is good. It's really good, but 18 touchdowns. We've got Chalk right now projected around 1,100 yards, but only 9 touchdowns. So there is potential there for him to go way above our current projections. But our current projections have Floyd Chalk RB 30. So again, like that's one where he's not going to be an early round player, but he's a potential RB3 kind of running back selection in the draft. And he could be he could end up easily as your top scoring running back there.
That's very impressive. And then we're going to go to Jameis Griffin from Oregon State. This is an easy one here. When you got Damian Martinez that's leaving, going to Miami, you already talked about him, the guy that's going to be taking over that spot. If he produces 80% of what Damian Martinez did, he's going to be a stud. So let's talk about why you've got him. I got Griffin from Oregon State in that spot.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. So yeah, if he can do 80% or 75% of what Damian Martinez did, they'll be great. They've got a good O-line coming back. Yeah, he's just set to take over. And so he had a big rise, really just with the depth chart change. We did assume he's going to be less productive. So the overall RB1 for Oregon State did drop a bit, but it's still, for Jameis Griffin, it was a big rise. So he comes up the depth chart and is taken over as RB1 there.
All right, good stuff there. So yeah, we looked at all West Coast running backs. Now we're going to start moving back to this side of the country. Look at a couple wide receivers. First one's Dalvin Smith from Western Kentucky. So before we get into why he's moved, one of the things about Dalvin Smith, hopefully the sites will get his position squared away, because last year Dalvin Smith was somebody that was a wide receiver / tight end. I am a big proponent on removing dual position eligibility, because to me that's just asking somebody to go against the spirit of the game and try to find positions, because whenever you've got somebody that's got double position, people are looking for somebody that they can play out of position. If they can find a wide receiver that they can play in their tight end spot where you've got very few people that are actually producing, that could be the difference between somebody going to the playoffs or going to a championship game. And Dalvin Smith was somebody that we had specific conversations about last year, because he was listed as a wide receiver / tight end. And we had to make a rule in our leagues that said he's going to be a wide receiver only, because that's how he was listed on their depth chart at Western Kentucky. But that's a side note. But hopefully everybody gets him squared away, because his value as a wide receiver is going to be way different than if it's at a tight end. If he's got that tight end mark and you have a league that's going to allow that, he might be a top 3 tight end potential just because he's playing out of position. But I digress. BMAC, why is he moved up the line in the wide receiver rankings itself?
So if he indeed takes over as wide receiver 1 for Western Kentucky, we have what's baked into our projections is a 3-year average for that position for the coach of that school. So we're looking at, super, super conservative metrics here, because we have him, as far as our modification, at minus 30%, just because wide receiver 1 for Western Kentucky has been so productive. Like, he's got a ceiling if he ends up being that wide receiver one completely for Western Kentucky. That's much higher than his projection. That's why I was saying it's like a super conservatively. We've got him at 77 catches, 975 yards, 9 touchdowns, which would be about 193 fantasy points. So, easily another touchdown or two puts him in the top 15, 16. So, I like him a lot. He's definitely a good red zone target, and we'll see if he actually takes over as wide receiver one, but he's trending in that direction. So we shall see this year.
All right, last but not least, I wish Show Me How to Dougie was around here, man, because this guy, more than any other player, his name came out of Doug's mouth more than anybody else. Squirrel White from Tennessee. So, BMAC, why are we back on the Squirrel White train after the 2023 season going to 24? Tell me why he's on this list.
I mean, really, I just think we were a year ahead. And I blame Joe Milton because they had to run a bunch. Like, Joe Milton wasn't the most accurate quarterback. We kind of all knew that. And going into the year, he just was what he was previously, at Michigan or at Tennessee and other games that he had played. So not the most accurate guy. And, Brew McCoy still hurt, coming back from an injury, like into the season likely. So I like Squirrel White to be the guy. I think they're going to be way more effective throwing the ball this year. So if you drafted him, I'd hold on to him. It's a disappointing year for sure last year compared to where we had him projected, but I like him to beat where we had. So to have a Tennessee wide receiver one at RB21, obviously the ceiling is there to do better. We've got him at 65 catches, 1,049 yards, 9.6 touchdowns. Could totally be better than that. But yeah, I like Squirrel White this year.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying about being maybe a year ahead. Tennessee having as many NFL caliber players that they had in their offense 2 years ago, they got drafted in the NFL. You needed every gear to work together last year for everybody to rise up. The quarterback, the wide receivers, as you said, we had a quarterback that was a little more inaccurate. So it wasn't a Hendon Hooker situation where you had the two high end wide receivers that got drafted. So hopefully now that there's an extra year for Squirrel White where he's the top guy, hopefully he does do that, because I drafted him last year because of Doug. Doug got me to draft him. I drafted him because I wanted Doug to, know that I listened to what he had to say, and he definitely underperformed.
I mean, there's been plenty of times in the past, where I've drafted a guy a year or two ahead, and that's painful in our league because we only have 3 drops really until recent changes to the league. But man, it's tough. But because you can sour on a player, like, because he's disappointed you for a full year. Like, he was unstartable. That's how inconsistent that offense was passing. But this year I think things will be different for him.
I tell you, one of the guys that's funny you bring it up. One of the guys that happened for me, I had Isaiah Pacheco, and Isaiah Pacheco just didn't do anything when I had him. I had him a little too early, and now Isaiah Pacheco is a 2-time Super Bowl champion starting running back. Frustrating, man, but that's what happens.
Yes, exactly. That is what happens. That's part of the game.
All right, so that's the Post-Spring ADP Risers. We've talked about what's going on in the legal world. We've talked about the video game, talked about ADP Risers. BMAC, where do you see us going when it comes to upcoming shows?
Yeah, it'll be time for a new mock and more rankings shows as we have more movement here. It's that time of year, man. The college football magazines are out on the shelves now. If you go, I picked up a Lindy's just because it was there. It's not like it's anything new in terms of news, but it's just fun to have those around. Phil Steele magazine's coming out soon. So we'll have a lot of that new information to look at. Like, Phil Steele does such a thorough job grading O-lines, which is hard to get news about. So that's one that can affect our rankings. And that's really the talk will be rankings, mock drafts, player movement, sleepers, all that stuff as we get closer to draft season.
Absolutely. If you were a fan of Colorado last year, which many people were, Offensive line is definitely something that needs to be paid attention to. So that's good that we can get some of those rankings in there.
Exactly.
All right. So when you watch this podcast, whether you watch it, whether you listen to it, we want to know what you guys think. What do you guys think is going to happen to college football when it comes to the NIL antitrust lawsuit, when it comes to players being able to be paid above board by the schools? Do you guys think that this is going to improve or this is going to degrade college football? Are you a traditionalist that's like, oh, the game that I loved is going to be gone, and how am I going to be a college football fan? And about the video game, what are the things you're most excited about? What are the things you're most scared about when it comes to the information that's already come out? We want to hear your comments, whether it is on the Discord, whether it's in the comments on this video, whether it's in the comments on the audio version of this. We want to know what you guys think. So make sure that you like, subscribe, go join the Discord at CFB Dynasty, and let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, man, those matter a lot. It just gives us energy, and that part matters for the algorithm too. So it's just good to be able to chat back and forth and talk football. Like we've been through the long spring, and now it just feels like it's that stretch run, like where the countdown on the website now is 84 days to kick off, and it's only 2 digits, and just a fast summer away from being able to, video games are in a few weeks or 6 weeks or so, and then it's draft season right after that.
Yep. And the season starts early this year. Week 0 is the earliest it can possibly be. Week 1 is the earliest it can possibly be. So it's going to be great to be able to get into some college football, get to our 12-team playoff, the thing that BMAC has been waiting for more than any other person. BMAC loves the fact that we have a 12-team playoff coming. I can't wait. This is going to be a wild year. Can't wait to see what happens in college football, whether it's the video game or on the field of play or in the courtroom.
Right. Valid.
All right. So unless there's something else, my name is Matt Knowles. I'm here with Brian McElfresh and for Doug Gravely. We thank you guys so much for joining us for the CFB Dynasty Podcast. See ya.
See you guys.
Thank you for listening to the CFB Dynasty Podcast. Help us out by subscribing on YouTube and reviewing us on your podcast network.